The rescue that changed everything. Commander Jack Rivers crouched behind a shattered boulder, his pulse pounding in his ears. Smoke filled the air as the wreckage of his downed ship burned in the distance. He gripped his blaster tightly, scanning the dense alien forest for movement. The creatures hunting him weren't friendly, snarling beasts with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. They had already taken down half his crew. Jack was the only one left. "This isn't how I go out," he muttered under his breath, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. A rustling sound to his left made him spin, weapon ready. But what emerged wasn't one of the beasts. It was a man, or at least something close to one. The figure was tall, with shimmering silver skin and dark, piercing eyes. His clothes, though torn and bloodied, bore intricate golden patterns that spoke of wealth and status. He stumbled, clutching his side where a deep wound leaked blue blood. "Help me," the alien said, his voice weak but commanding. Jack hesitated. He didn't know this alien or his intentions. For all Jack knew, he could be leading him into a trap. But the desperation in the alien's eyes was unmistakable. Jack couldn't ignore it. "All right," Jack said, slinging his blaster over his shoulder. He reached out to steady the alien. "Let's get you out of here." The alien blinked, surprised at Jack's willingness to help. You'll save me." "Yeah, but don't make me regret it," Jack replied, already scanning the area for a safe path. As they moved, Jack noticed the alien was struggling to keep up. His injuries were worse than they looked. Jack sighed and crouched down. "Hop on. You're not going to make it if we keep this pace." The alien hesitated but finally climbed onto Jack's back. "I never thought a human would carry me," he said, almost to himself. "Well, I never thought I'd be playing hero on an alien planet, so we're both having a weird day," Jack shot back. The snarling of the beasts grew louder behind them, and Jack quickened his pace. His muscles burned, but he didn't stop. "What's your name?" Jack asked, trying to keep the alien focused. "Thurok," the alien replied, wincing with every step. "King of the Zorvian Empire." Jack nearly tripped. "You're a king. What's a king doing out here getting mauled by monsters?" "It's complicated," Thurok said. "I was betrayed by those I trusted. They sent me here to die." "Great," Jack muttered. "Now I'm rescuing alien royalty." No pressure. Ahead, Jack spotted an abandoned outpost, a crumbling structure hidden among the trees. It wasn't much, but it would provide some cover. "We'll stop there," Jack said, adjusting Thurok on his back. "You're lucky I'm too stubborn to leave anyone behind." They reached the outpost just as the beasts burst through the trees. Jack kicked open the door and shoved Thurok inside. He turned and fired his blaster, taking down 2 of the creatures before slamming the door shut. Thurok slumped against the wall, his breathing ragged. Why did you help me?" Jack leaned against the door, trying to catch his breath. "Because it's the right thing to do. Don't your people believe in helping others?" Thurok looked away, his expression unreadable. "Not like this." The door shook as the beasts clawed at it, snarling and howling. Jack reinforced it with a metal beam, but he knew it wouldn't hold forever. "Listen, Thurok," Jack said, crouching next to him. "If you've got some royal tricks up your sleeve, now's the time to use them." Thurok managed a weak smile. "I might have one, but it will drain the last of my energy." "Do it," Jack said. "I'll cover you." Thurok closed his eyes and placed a hand on the ground. A faint glow spread from his palm, rippling outward. The snarling outside stopped abruptly, replaced by eerie silence. Jack peeked out a crack in the door and saw the beasts retreating, their glowing eyes fading into the darkness. He turned back to Thurok, who had collapsed on the floor. "Impressive," Jack said, shaking his head. "But you look like you're about to pass out." Thurok opened his eyes slightly. "You saved me. I will not forget this, human." Jack sighed and sat down next to him. "Yeah, well, Let's just survive the night first." As the alien moonlight streamed through the cracks in the walls, Jack couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. This wasn't just a random rescue. It felt bigger, like the start of something he couldn't quite see yet. And as Theric drifted into unconsciousness, Jack muttered to himself, "What kind of king owes a debt to a guy like me?" The invitation. 2 weeks after the chaotic events on the alien planet, Jack Rivers sat in the cockpit of his patched-up ship, staring at a blinking message on his console. The sender's name was a single, unfamiliar word: Theric. The subject line read, "You are summoned." Jack leaned back in his seat, rubbing his temples. Summoned? By who? Oh, right. The alien king I carried through a jungle like a sack of potatoes. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the reply button. He could ignore it, pretend he never saw it, and go about his usual mercenary work. But something about that moment in the forest, the desperation in Theric's eyes, stuck with him. Jack wasn't sure why, but he felt like this wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, he owed it to himself to see what it was all about. Jack opened the message. A hologram of Theric appeared, larger than life, and dressed in gleaming gold armor that sparkled against a background of alien skyscrapers. His voice was calm but commanding. "Commander Rivers, I have not forgotten your bravery. Without you, I would not be alive today. As king of the Zorvian Empire, I owe you a debt, one that cannot be repaid with mere words. Come to my homeworld, Zorvith Prime. Your presence is not just requested, it is required." The hologram flickered off, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. "Required, huh?" Jack muttered, rolling his eyes. Typical royalty. Still, he couldn't shake the curiosity gnawing at him. Theric's message didn't sound like a simple thank you. There was something more, something urgent. Finally, Jack set his ship's coordinates for Zorvith Prime and let the autopilot engage. 3 days later, Jack's ship emerged from hyperspace, and his jaw dropped. Zorvith Prime shimmered like a jewel against the blackness of space. Gigantic rings of floating platforms surrounded the planet, glowing with pulsating energy. Hundreds of ships of all shapes and sizes zipped between the platforms, their sleek designs making Jack's rusty old freighter feel like a tin can in comparison. As Jack descended into the planet's atmosphere, the view became even more breathtaking. Towering spires of crystalline cities pierced the sky, connected by glowing bridges that seemed to defy gravity. Strange plants with iridescent leaves swayed in the air, filling the cities with vibrant colors. A voice crackled over his ship's comm system. "Commander Rivers, you are cleared to land at the Royal Docking Bay. Follow the beacon." Jack adjusted his controls, following a flashing light that guided him to an enormous landing platform. Waiting for him was an entourage of Zorvian soldiers, their silver armor polished to a mirror shine. They stood in perfect formation, their expressions unreadable. "All right," Jack said to himself, grabbing his blaster as a precaution. "Let's see what this is all about." As he stepped off the ship, a cheer erupted from the crowd below the platform. Thousands of Zorvians were gathered, their faces turned toward Jack with admiration and awe. Banners depicting Theric's royal emblem, an intricate golden starburst, fluttered in the wind. "Okay, this is officially weird," Jack muttered under his breath. Theric himself emerged from the crowd, his presence commanding and regal. He was no longer the wounded and desperate figure Jack had carried through the jungle. Now he stood tall, his silver skin reflecting the sunlight, his golden crown resting firmly on his head. "Commander Rivers," Theric said, his voice carrying across the platform. "You honor us with your presence." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Didn't seem like I had much of a choice." Theric smiled, an expression that looked both genuine and calculated. "A debt of gratitude is not a light thing in our culture. Your actions have earned you the respect of my people and the eternal gratitude of my empire." Jack scratched the back of his neck, uncomfortable with all the attention. "Look, I appreciate the thanks, but I'm just a guy trying to survive. I didn't do it for a reward. And yet you will receive one, Theric said, gesturing for Jack to follow him. As they walked, Theric explained how the events of the jungle had not only saved his life, but also uncovered a conspiracy within his court. The betrayal runs deep, Theric said, his tone dark. My enemies sought to remove me from power. Thanks to you, their plans failed, but the danger is far from over. Jack frowned. So why bring me here? I'm just a human with a ship and a blaster. What can I do against political schemes? Theric stopped and turned to face Jack, his expression serious. You are more than that. You are proof that alliances can be forged beyond our stars. And you are someone I trust. Jack wasn't sure how to respond to that. Trust wasn't something he was used to hearing from royalty. The conversation ended as they arrived at an opulent throne room, where a grand feast had been prepared. Zorvian music filled the air, and tables overflowed with strange alien dishes that glowed and steamed. At the center of the room was a raised platform, draped in silk and gold. Theric raised his hand, silencing the room. Tonight, we honor the man who saved our king. The crowd cheered, but Jack felt uneasy. Something about the grandiosity of it all didn't sit right with him. Then Theric's voice dropped, and he gestured toward the platform. And tonight, I give him a gift that will bind our worlds forever. A figure stepped onto the platform, and the crowd gasped in awe. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Standing before him was the most stunning woman he had ever seen, her shimmering blue skin glowing softly under the lights, her golden eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. This, Theric announced, is my sister, Princess Lysara. She is my gift to you, Commander Rivers. Jack's eyes widened. Wait, you're gifting me your sister. The room fell silent, every Zorvian watching Jack's reaction. Lysara's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of defiance in her golden eyes. Jack's mind raced as he realized that whatever was happening, it was far bigger than a simple gesture of gratitude, and he had no idea how to handle it. The stunning reveal. The grand hall fell silent, the weight of Theric's words hanging in the air. Jack Rivers stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. This is my sister, Princess Lysara. She is my gift to you, Commander Rivers. The Zorvian crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the towering crystalline walls. Jack, however, remained rooted to the spot, his face a mix of shock and confusion. He glanced at the woman standing on the raised platform. Princess Lysara's golden eyes were locked onto his, her expression calm but unreadable. Jack cleared his throat, breaking the awkward silence between them. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said, turning to Theric. You're gifting me, your sister, as in, a person. Theric tilted his head, his regal demeanor unshaken. It is the greatest honor I can bestow upon you, Commander. In Zorvian culture, offering a member of the royal family as a companion signifies unbreakable trust and gratitude. Jack blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Look, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm pretty sure humans don't do this kind of thing. You can't just hand someone over like they're a shiny trinket. The crowd's cheering began to fade into murmurs, the Zorvians exchanging puzzled glances. To them, this was an unparalleled gesture of respect, and Jack's reaction was clearly unexpected. Lysara stepped forward, her movements graceful and deliberate. Her shimmering blue skin caught the soft glow of the hall's lights, and the intricate silver patterns etched into her ceremonial gown seemed to ripple with every step. She stopped a few feet from Jack, her gaze unwavering. I see you are surprised, Commander, she said, her voice smooth and commanding yet laced with a hint of amusement. But let me assure you, this is not a decision made lightly. Jack scratched the back of his neck, still unsure how to navigate this situation. Yeah, no offense, Princess, but I don't think I'm exactly qualified for this. Lysara arched an elegant eyebrow. Qualified? To accept gratitude or to stand beside a royal? Jack opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by Theric, who stepped forward, his tone firm. "Commander Rivers, you saved my life at great personal risk. In doing so, you not only preserved my rule, but also prevented my empire from plunging into chaos. This is not just a gift. It is a bond, a symbol of unity between our people." Jack glanced between Theric and Lysara, his instincts screaming at him to tread carefully. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, much less in a room full of aliens who clearly had different ideas of what was normal. But what unnerved him most was the faint flicker of defiance in Lysara's golden eyes. She didn't seem entirely on board with this arrangement either. "All right," Jack said finally, raising his hands. "Let's say, hypothetically, I go along with this. What exactly does it mean? Are we talking about some kind of diplomatic partnership, or are you expecting me to?" He stopped himself, realizing he might be digging a deeper hole. Theric smiled, a rare expression that softened his otherwise imposing features. "It means Lysara will accompany you, stand beside you, and ensure that you are treated as an honored ally of the Zorian Empire. Her presence alone will protect you from those who might question your worth or seek to harm you." Lysara's expression tightened ever so slightly, though her tone remained measured. "In simpler terms, Commander, I am to be your guide, your shield, and your responsibility." Jack exhaled, his unease growing. This was starting to feel less like a reward and more like a diplomatic headache wrapped in glittering silk. The crowd began to cheer again, clearly interpreting Jack's silence as agreement. Lysara stepped even closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I may be your gift, Commander, but do not think for a moment that I am here to obey your every whim." Jack looked at her, a wry smile tugging at his lips despite himself. "Yeah, I kind of figured that out already." As the feast continued, Jack found himself seated next to Lysara at a long, ornate table. Alien dishes were placed before them, steaming and glowing with colors that didn't exist in any human cuisine. Jack poked at something that looked suspiciously like it was still moving, deciding to stick to the alien equivalent of bread. "You don't seem thrilled about this arrangement," Jack said, glancing at Lysara. She didn't look at him, instead focusing on the drink in her crystal goblet. "And you seem far too casual for someone in your position." Jack chuckled. "Yeah, well, casual is how I survive. No offense, princess, but I don't think either of us wanted this." Lysara finally turned to face him, her golden eyes sharp. "I am loyal to my brother, and I will do what is necessary to uphold the traditions of our people. But make no mistake, this is as much a duty for me as it is an honor for you." "Duty, huh?" Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "Well, if it's any consolation, I don't think either of us knows what we're doing." Lysara allowed the faintest smile to cross her lips, a gesture so fleeting Jack almost missed it. "Perhaps not, but that doesn't mean we won't figure it out." As the evening wore on, Jack noticed the subtle tension in the room. Theric's advisors whispered among themselves, casting occasional glances in his direction. It was clear that not everyone in the room approved of the king's decision. And then there was Lysara. While she maintained her composed exterior, Jack could tell there was more to her than met the eye. Her movements, her words, even her silence. Everything about her suggested layers of complexity Jack couldn't yet unravel. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just about gratitude. Theric had a deeper motive, and Jack had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, he was now a part of it. A deal with the princess. The sun dipped below the horizon of Zordath Prime, casting an otherworldly purple hue across the shimmering cityscape. Jack Rivers stood on the balcony of the royal guest chambers, staring out at the alien metropolis below. The evening breeze carried faint, melodic sounds from the bustling streets, a mix of celebration and unease. Despite the stunning view, Jack's mind was far from at ease. Behind him, the door to the balcony slid open with a soft hum. Jack didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He'd been expecting her. "I see you're not one for royal banquets." Lysara's voice broke the silence, Her tone was calm, but there was a hint of steel beneath it. Jack smirked without turning. Let's just say I'm not used to being the center of attention, especially when half the room looks like they want me dead. Lysera stepped closer, her movements quiet and deliberate. She leaned against the balcony railing, keeping a careful distance. The soft glow of the city lights reflected off her blue skin, making her look almost ethereal. "They do not trust you," she said bluntly. "Many in the court believe my brother's decision to gift me to a human was reckless. They see you as an outsider, a threat." Jack finally turned to face her, folding his arms across his chest. "And what about you, princess? Do you see me as a threat?" Lysera's golden eyes met his, unflinching. "I see you as unpredictable. That makes you dangerous, but not necessarily in a bad way." Jack chuckled softly. "Well, that's one way to put it. But let's be honest here. You don't seem too thrilled about this arrangement either." Lysera's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "It is not my place to question my brother's decisions. I am loyal to my family and my people." "That's not an answer," Jack said, his voice quieter now. "You didn't choose this, did you?" For a moment, Lysera's composure faltered. She looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of the railing. "No," she admitted. "I did not." The honesty in her voice caught Jack off guard. He hadn't expected her to admit it so openly. "Then why go along with it?" he asked. "Why not tell your brother no?" Lysera's gaze snapped back to him, her golden eyes blazing. "You think it's that simple? Refusing a royal decree would bring shame to my family and spark division among our people. My brother's enemies would seize the opportunity to weaken his rule. I cannot allow that." Jack studied her for a moment, seeing the weight of her words etched into her features. She wasn't just a pawn in this game. She was carrying the burden of an entire empire on her shoulders. "All right," Jack said, leaning against the railing beside her. "Then let's make a deal." Lysera raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "A deal?" "Yeah," Jack said. "We both agree to play along with this whole gift thing. For now. But we do it on our terms. No one's going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. And I'll make sure your brother doesn't get the wrong idea about what this arrangement means." Lysera tilted her head, studying him. "And what do you get out of this deal?" "Peace of mind," Jack said with a shrug. "I'm not here to step on anyone's toes or mess up your life. I just want to get through this without causing a galactic incident." Lysera's lips curved into a faint smile, the first real one Jack had seen from her. "You are an unusual human, Commander Rivers." "I'll take that as a compliment," Jack said, grinning. For the first time, the tension between them seemed to ease. They stood side by side, watching the city lights flicker like stars below. But the moment was short-lived. A sudden explosion rocked the palace, the shockwave rattling the balcony railing. Jack instinctively grabbed Lysera's arm, steadying her as she stumbled. "What the hell was that?" Jack said, scanning the horizon. A plume of smoke rose from a nearby tower, and the faint sound of alarms began to echo through the city. Lysera's calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a sharp focus. "An attack," she said, her voice grim. "They've come for me." Jack frowned. "Who's they?" Before Lysera could answer, the door to the balcony burst open, and a Zorvian royal guard staggered in, clutching a wound on his side. "Princess," he gasped, "the palace is under siege. The traitors are inside." Jack's instincts kicked in. He turned to Lysera. "We need to get you out of here. Now." Lysera hesitated, clearly torn between her duty and the need to survive. But when the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, she nodded. "Follow me." Jack grabbed his blaster and followed her into the room. Lysera moved with precision, leading him through a hidden passage behind a decorative panel. The narrow corridor was dimly lit, and the sounds of the chaos outside grew fainter as they descended deeper into the palace. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, his voice low. "To the royal escape tunnels," Lysera replied. They lead outside the city. From there, we can regroup with loyal forces." Jack nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. He didn't know who these attackers were or why they were targeting Lysara, but one thing was clear: they weren't going to let her go without a fight. As they reached the end of the passage, Lysara stopped and turned to Jack. "This is where our deal begins," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. "If we survive this, I will honor your terms, but for now, you must trust me." Jack looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. "All right, princess," he said, raising his blaster. "Let's get out of here." And with that, they stepped into the darkness, ready to face whatever was waiting for them on the other side. The assassination attempt. The royal escape tunnels were damp and eerily quiet, the flickering lights barely illuminating the narrow stone walls. Jack Rivers stayed close behind Princess Lysara, his blaster drawn, and his senses on high alert. Every creak, every echo made him tense, his finger hovering over the trigger. Behind them, the sounds of chaos in the palace had faded, but Jack knew better than to relax. The silence was often more dangerous than noise. Lysara moved with a precision that impressed Jack. She wasn't just a royal figurehead. She knew these tunnels well, her every step calculated. Her shimmering blue skin glowed faintly in the dim light, giving her an almost ethereal presence. But Jack could also see the tension in her posture, the subtle tightness in her jaw. "How much further?" Jack asked, his voice low. "Not far," Lysara replied, her tone steady. "The tunnels lead to a hidden exit outside the city. From there, we can signal loyal forces." Jack frowned. "You keep saying loyal forces. How many of your people are actually on your side?" Lysara glanced back at him, her golden eyes sharp. "Enough. For now." That wasn't exactly reassuring, but Jack didn't press further. He had bigger concerns, like who was trying to kill them, and why. They reached a junction where the tunnel split into 3 paths. Lysara hesitated, studying the symbols carved into the walls. Jack didn't like the pause. It gave whoever was hunting them more time to catch up. "Trouble?" he asked, his grip tightening on his blaster. "No," she said quickly, pointing to the leftmost tunnel. "This way." But as they started down the passage, Jack heard it, the faint sound of footsteps. He froze, motioning for Lysara to stop. The footsteps were coming from the path they'd just taken, and they were getting louder. "We've got company," Jack whispered. Lysara's expression hardened. "They found us." Jack scanned the area, looking for cover. The tunnel offered little in the way of protection, just cold stone walls and a few scattered crates. "Stay behind me," he said, positioning himself between Lysara and the approaching footsteps. The first attacker appeared around the corner, a Zorvian assassin, clad in dark armor, their weapon gleaming in the faint light. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired, the blaster bolt striking the assassin square in the chest. The figure crumpled to the ground, but more were coming. "Run," Jack shouted, firing at the advancing enemies as Lysara bolted down the tunnel. She hesitated only for a moment, clearly torn between leaving Jack and obeying his command. Finally, she turned and sprinted ahead. Jack followed, firing over his shoulder as the assassins pursued. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the tunnels, creating a cacophony that made it impossible to tell how many enemies were chasing them. All Jack knew was that they were outnumbered, and the assassins weren't holding back. "Keep going," he yelled as Lysara glanced back. "I'll hold them off." "No," she snapped, stopping abruptly and pulling out a small ornate device from her belt. "You're not sacrificing yourself." "What are you doing?" Jack asked, ducking as a blaster bolt narrowly missed his head. Lysara didn't answer. She pressed a sequence of buttons on the device, and suddenly, a shimmering energy barrier appeared behind them, cutting off the assassins. The barrier crackled with power, and when one of the assassins tried to step through, they were thrown back with a scream. Jack stared at the barrier, then at Lysara. "You could have used that earlier, you know." It has limited power, she said, her voice calm but clipped. We need to move before it fails. Jack nodded, and they took off down the tunnel. The energy barrier bought them precious time, but Jack knew it wouldn't hold forever. They had to get out before the assassins found another way around. The hidden exit was a small, unassuming door carved into the rock. Lysara pressed her palm against a scanner, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly above them, the stars brighter and closer than any Jack had ever seen. "This is it?" Jack asked, scanning the barren landscape. No backup, no secret ship. Lysara pointed to a rocky outcrop in the distance. "There's a secure bunker beyond that ridge. It has communications equipment. We can call for reinforcements there." Jack sighed. Of course it's not nearby. Before they could move, a faint whirring sound filled the air. Jack's heart sank as he looked up to see 3 sleek drones hovering above them, their red lights locked onto their position. "Drones," he muttered, because things weren't bad enough. The drones opened fire, forcing Jack and Lysara to dive for cover behind a cluster of rocks. Jack returned fire, but the drones were fast, their movements erratic and hard to predict. "We can't stay here," Lysara said, her voice strained. "They'll pin us down." Jack glanced at her, then at the drones. He had an idea, but it wasn't a good one. "Go for the ridge," he said. "I'll cover you." Lysara's eyes narrowed. "I'm not leaving you." "You're the one they're after," Jack said. "If you don't make it to that bunker, this whole thing is pointless. Go." Lysara hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Don't get yourself killed, human." Jack grinned despite the situation. No promises. As Lysara sprinted toward the ridge, Jack focused his fire on the drones, drawing their attention. One of the drones exploded in a shower of sparks, but the remaining 2 adjusted their aim, their weapons locking onto Jack. He ducked behind the rocks, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts. Suddenly, one of the drones faltered, its lights flickering. Jack looked up to see Lysara standing on the ridge, holding a small device in her hand. She pressed a button, and the second drone crashed to the ground, its circuits fried. Jack took out the final drone with a well-placed shot, then ran to join Lysara on the ridge. "Nice work," he said, breathing heavily. "Didn't think you had a tech side." "There's much you don't know about me," Lysara said, her tone almost teasing. Jack chuckled, but the moment was short-lived. In the distance, more lights appeared, ground vehicles, heading straight for them. "We're not done yet," Jack said, raising his blaster. "Let's move." Together, they ran toward the bunker, knowing that their survival, and the fate of the Empire, depended on what happened next. The truth about Lysara. The bunker was dark and cold, carved deep into the rocky hillside. Jack Rivers leaned against a metal console, catching his breath as the heavy doors heeled shut behind them with a resounding hiss. The faint hum of the bunker's power systems echoed in the confined space, and emergency lights cast everything in a dim orange glow. Lysara moved quickly, her fingers flying over the controls of a communications panel. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, as though she had rehearsed this moment 100 times before. Jack watched her, his blaster still clutched in one hand, his other wiping sweat from his brow. "So," Jack said, breaking the silence, "care to tell me why half your empire wants you dead?" Lysara didn't respond immediately. Her golden eyes were focused on the screen in front of her, scanning lines of alien text that meant nothing to Jack. Finally, she straightened, her expression unreadable. "It's not the Empire," she said quietly. "It's a faction within it." Jack tilted his head. "That's not much of an answer." Lysara turned to face him, her gaze sharp and calculating. "The truth is complicated." Jack laughed humorlessly, pushing off the console. "Yeah, no kidding. I've been shot at, chased through tunnels, and nearly blown up because of you. And all I've gotten so far is vague answers and royal speeches. You owe me more than that, princess." For a moment, Lysara seemed to consider brushing him off, But then her shoulders sagged ever so slightly. She wasn't used to showing vulnerability, Jack realized. Whatever she was about to say, it wasn't easy for her. "My brother didn't tell you everything," she began, her voice steady, but quieter now. "When he gifted me to you, it wasn't just a gesture of gratitude. It was a way to protect me." Jack frowned. "Protect you from what?" "From myself," Lysera said, her gaze dropping. "Or rather, from what I am." Jack blinked, unsure of what she meant. "You're going to have to spell it out for me." Lysera stepped closer, her golden eyes locking onto his. "Have you ever heard of the Zerithian Protocol?" Jack shook his head. "Should I have?" "It's an ancient legend," Lysera explained. "A power said to be passed down through the Zorvian royal bloodline. It was thought to be a myth, a story told to keep our enemies at bay. But it's real. And I am the manifestation of it." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. Manifestation. What kind of power are we talking about here? Lysera hesitated, then raised her hand. A soft glow emanated from her palm, and within moments, tendrils of golden energy began to swirl around her fingers. The air grew heavy, charged with electricity. Jack took an involuntary step back, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious. "This," Lysera said, her voice tinged with regret. "This is why they fear me." Jack watched the golden energy dance around her hand, equal parts mesmerized and unsettled. "So you've got some kind of superpower. What does it do?" "It's more than just power," Lysera said, extinguishing the glow with a flick of her wrist. "The Zerithian Protocol is a force that can reshape matter, disrupt energy fields, even override technology. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire worlds. That's why my existence is dangerous. If my brother's enemies capture me, they'll use me as a weapon to seize the Empire." Jack let out a low whistle, leaning back against the console. "Okay, that's a lot to take in." Lysera's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Now you understand why Theric sent me with you. He thought you could protect me, keep me away from those who would exploit my abilities." Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I'm not exactly equipped to deal with galaxy-shattering powers, Princess. I'm just a guy with a blaster and a stubborn streak. And yet you've kept me alive this long," Lysera said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Perhaps my brother wasn't entirely wrong about you." Jack shook his head, still processing everything. "So these assassins, the coup, all of it, it's about getting to you." Lysera nodded. "If they control me, they control the fate of the Empire. That's why they won't stop until I'm either captured or dead." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Jack didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't the kind of problem you could shoot your way out of. Finally, he straightened, meeting Lysera's gaze. "All right, Princess, what's the plan?" Lysera blinked, clearly surprised by his sudden resolve. "You're staying." Jack shrugged. "You think I'm going to bail after everything we've been through? Not a chance. But if we're going to survive this, we need a real plan. Something better than running and hoping for the best." Lysera studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed. The bunker's communication system is still operational. We can send a secure signal to Theric's forces, but it will take time for reinforcements to arrive." Jack frowned. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Lysera said, her tone steady, "we prepare for a fight." As Lysera began working on the communications panel, Jack paced the room, his mind racing. The more he thought about it, the more he realized just how deep he was in. He had gone from a simple mercenary job to protecting an alien princess with godlike powers. And now, the fate of an entire empire seemed to rest on their shoulders. But as insane as it all was, Jack couldn't bring himself to walk away. Maybe it was his stubborn nature, or maybe it was something else. He glanced at Lysera, her blue skin glowing faintly in the light of the console. She carried herself with the poise of a royal, But underneath that, Jack could see the weight she bore. She wasn't just a princess. She was a survivor, like him. And that was enough to keep him in the fight. "All right," Jack said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see what these assassins are really made of." Lysera looked up, her golden eyes meeting his. For the first time, there was a spark of hope in her gaze. "Thank you, Jack," she said quietly. Jack smirked. "Don't thank me yet, princess. This is only the beginning." The final stand. The bunker trembled as distant explosions rippled through the rocky ground above. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the faint sound of blaster fire echoed through the walls. Jack Rivers checked the power level on his blaster, his jaw tightening. They didn't have much time. "We've got incoming," Jack said, glancing at the security monitor. The grainy feed showed a squad of assassins advancing on the bunker, their sleek black armor gleaming under the moonlight. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons drawn. Lysera stood at the central console, her golden eyes fixed on the screen. She had abandoned her ceremonial attire in favor of a more practical outfit, lightweight armor that hugged her form while allowing for movement. The regal princess was gone. In her place stood a warrior, ready for battle. "How long until reinforcements arrive?" Jack asked, his voice tense. Lysera's fingers danced over the controls. "The signal went through, but the nearest loyal forces are hours away. We're on our own." Jack let out a low whistle. "Of course we are. Just once, I'd like to have the numbers on my side." Lysera glanced at him, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "You seem to do well against impossible odds, Commander." Jack chuckled dryly. "Yeah, but my luck has to run out eventually." The first wave hit fast and hard. The assassins breached the outer defenses with precision, their plasma charges melting through the steel doors like butter. Jack crouched behind a barricade, firing at anything that moved. The air was thick with the sound of blaster fire and the acrid smell of scorched metal. "Left flank!" Lysera shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She unleashed a burst of golden energy from her hands, the tendrils slamming into two attackers and sending them flying into the wall. The energy crackled and sparked, leaving a faint glow in its wake. Jack popped up from cover and took out another assassin with a well-placed shot. "You've got some handy tricks, princess." "Let's hope they're enough," she replied, her tone grim. The assassins were relentless, their training evident in the way they moved and coordinated. For every one Jack and Lysera took down, it felt like two more took their place. Jack's blaster grew hot in his hand, and his muscles ached from diving and rolling for cover. "They're pushing us back," Jack yelled. "We need to bottleneck them." Lysera nodded, her mind racing. "There's a choke point in the main corridor. If we can force them into it, I can take out multiple at once." "Let's do it," Jack said, motioning for her to follow. "I'll draw their fire. You handle the big finish." Jack sprinted into the main corridor, firing over his shoulder to keep the assassins focused on him. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, some so close he could feel the heat against his skin. He ducked behind a pillar, gritting his teeth as another explosion rocked the bunker. "They're all yours," he shouted to Lysera. Lysera stepped into the corridor, her hands glowing with golden energy. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, and then unleashed a massive surge of power. The energy burst forward like a tidal wave, consuming everything in its path. The assassins didn't stand a chance. Their armor disintegrated, and their weapons shorted out as the golden energy washed over them. When the dust settled, the corridor was eerily silent. Jack emerged from behind the pillar, his eyes wide. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." Lysera smirked, though her breathing was heavy. "I'll keep that in mind." The quiet didn't last. Jack checked the monitor again and cursed under his breath. More incoming. They'd got reinforcements. Lysera's expression darkened. "They're not going to stop. Not until we're both dead." Jack frowned, his mind racing. They couldn't keep fighting like this. Sooner or later, they'd be overwhelmed. They needed a way to end this. Now, what about the failsafe? Jack asked suddenly, pointing to the console. This bunker has to have one. Something to take them all out at once. Lysera hesitated. There is, but it's not a precision weapon. The self-defense system will destroy everything within a 1-mile radius, including us. Jack's lips thinned. Great, so it's suicide. It's a last resort, Lysera said, and one we may have to use. Before Jack could respond, the bunker shook violently. The assassins were using heavier charges now, and it was only a matter of time before they breached the inner defenses. Jack looked at Lysera, his jaw tightening. If we do this, we need to make sure it counts. Lysera nodded, her golden eyes meeting his. Agreed. But first, we need to buy time to set it up. The final stand was brutal. Jack and Lysera fought side by side, their movements in perfect sync despite the chaos. Jack's blaster was nearly depleted, and Lysera's energy attacks grew weaker with each use. But they held the line, refusing to give the assassins an inch. Finally, Lysera called out, "It's ready. We need to retreat to the core chamber." Jack fired one last shot, taking down an assassin who had gotten too close, and followed Lysera to the central console. The screen displayed a countdown, already ticking down from 2 minutes. "This is cutting it close," Jack muttered. Lysera's expression was grim. "Once it starts, there's no stopping it." Jack nodded. "Then let's make sure they don't stop us." The assassins breached the final door just as the countdown hit 30 seconds. Jack and Lysera stood together in the center of the room, their backs against the console. The assassins surged forward, but Lysera raised her hands, creating a glowing barrier that held them back. "It won't hold for long," she said through gritted teeth. "It just needs to hold long enough," Jack replied, his blaster raised. The final seconds ticked away, and the assassins made one last desperate push. Jack fired until his blaster overheated, and Lysera's barrier began to crack under the strain. And then the failsafe activated. A brilliant wave of energy erupted from the core, engulfing everything in its path. The assassins were vaporized instantly, and the bunker shook as the shockwave expanded outward. Jack and Lysera were thrown to the ground, the light blinding them. When the dust finally settled, the bunker was eerily quiet. Jack groaned, pushing himself to his feet. "We're alive." Lysera sat up, her expression dazed. "The core chamber is shielded. We survived." Jack let out a shaky laugh, collapsing against the wall. "You could have mentioned that earlier." Lysera managed a faint smile. "Where's the fun in that?" Hours later, reinforcements arrived, led by Theric himself. The Zorvian king looked at his sister and Jack, both battered but alive, and nodded in approval. "You've done more than I could have asked," Theric said, his voice heavy with gratitude. Jack glanced at Lysera, then back at Theric. "Yeah, well, next time you need a galaxy-saving favor, maybe don't forget to mention the assassins." Theric smiled faintly. "I will keep that in mind." As Jack and Lysera boarded the transport ship, leaving the ruined bunker behind, Lysera turned to him. "You could have walked away." Jack shrugged. "And miss out on all the fun." "Not a chance." Lysera's golden eyes softened. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Jack grinned. "Don't thank me yet, princess. Something tells me our adventure is just getting started." And as the ship rose into the sky, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that she was right.